This is Metro Week. Our top story, will space tourism take off from Tucson? Worldview Enterprises is counting down to it. We'll explore the plans and the legal fight over Pima County's move to build a launch pad and other facilities for Worldview. Then our Journalists Roundtable analyzes the week's news.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Andrea Kelly. Two Tucsonans started Worldview as a space flight company that will locate its headquarters and a launch pad in Tucson. Pima County has agreed to spend $15 million on a headquarters and manufacturing facility for Worldview and a balloon launch pad. Worldview will pay rent for 20 years, totaling more than the county will spend on the site. Worldview says it will hire 400 employees in the next 5 years. CEO Jane Pointer joined me in the studio to discuss the company's plans. What is Worldview? Explain your company to me.
The public face of Worldview has really been space tourism to date, but a large part of our business is using the similar balloon technology that we use to take people to space to take all kinds of instruments to space, whether it's for communications, remote sensing, weather. In fact, already flying. We're flying instruments from all over airports in Arizona.
And that's already underway. The tourism is not yet, but the instrumentation is.
That's right. So we're already flying payloads for NASA, Northrop Grumman, other universities, that kind of thing from all over Arizona.
And you have a new financial backer that you're ready to announce?
Yeah, we just announced that we just closed another round of financing. Very excited about that. So we've spent a lot of time really building a world-class team. And your investors are part of that team. So we really have brought on now some world-class investors with Canaan Partners and also Norwest Ventures and Moment Ventures and others. So we're very excited because this is really going to enable us to launch this product, this new product, a Stratolite product that we're bringing out this year.
So what is the Stratolite?
A Stratolite is, if you think of what a satellite can do in orbit, whizzing over our heads at 17,500 miles an hour, now think of coming down to just about 20 miles above the Earth, and you have a platform that basically is stationary. It can stay over an area of interest for a long period of time, and we use our balloon platform to do that. So we can do a lot of things with a Stratolite that you could do with a satellite, for example, like communications, first response, early fire detection, which would be great for this area. We're also with communications to help our troops in remote locations. So we're very excited to be able to bring that online this year.
And the latest investor is $15 million?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Now I want to have you explain the agreement that you made with the county. What are you giving and what are you getting?
So we actually made a deal with Arizona. So Governor Ducey was also involved, the Arizona Commerce Authority, the city of Tucson, and the county, as you mentioned. With the county in particular, it's a building that we're renting for them. They're in the process of building it right now. And then co-located next to the building is also a launch pad that is going to be for public access. So Raytheon, it's right at the south gate of Raytheon, so they'll be able to use it. Other members of Tucson will be able to use it. We'll also draw other people into the community to use this spaceport as well.
So why make the agreement with the state and Pima County as opposed to funding it on your own?
So we had a nationwide search for where we were going to put Worldview for a long period of time. Where were our headquarters going to be? And Florida was one state that came to us, was very excited about Worldview, really courted us very heavily. New Mexico, we were very excited that they also courted us. And we were very excited to see that Arizona wanted to have this homegrown company stay right here, and they stepped up as well. So it's really the way economic development is done now. You know, the states have to compete in order to get exciting industries in the community.
And you're from Tucson, so this is home.
I have been in Tucson for almost 30 years, so Tucson is truly my home.
Thanks for coming in and explaining it to us, Jane.
Thank you so much for having me.
The lease between Worldview and the county is being contested in court. The Goldwater Institute, a conservative think tank in Phoenix, sued Pima County, saying the lease violates the state constitution. Here's my interview with Jim Manley, a Goldwater Institute lawyer. So let's just start at the beginning. Why is the Goldwater Institute suing Pima County?
Well, Pima County took out a $15 million loan to build a new headquarters and balloon pad for Worldview. And the idea is that Worldview will be able to expand their business into space tourism, and that will have a benefit for the county. The problem is that Worldview isn't paying market rates for the headquarters lease, and it's getting the balloon pad for free. And so that violates both the Arizona Constitution and several statutes that govern how counties can lease out property and build new buildings.
And the sort of layman term for the part of the Constitution it violates is called the gift clause, correct?
That's right.
Can you explain what that states, what it says?
So the gift clause has been part of our Constitution from the beginning because 100 years ago, what cities and counties would do was pay railroads to build a spur to their city or town, or buy into the railroad company to subsidize the railroad company. And the framers realized that that was a huge waste of taxpayer money and that these deals always went bad for the taxpayers. And so they built in protections against these sorts of corporate welfare deals into our Constitution. And it's only been in the last few years that we've been able to give some teeth to that clause through litigation that the Goldwater Institute has done.
The county says this is a good deal for taxpayers because the company Worldview will add jobs for the community and bring in other investments. Why does that then not sort of counter the gift clause argument if there is potentially a taxpayer benefit?
What the gift clause requires is consideration. And so that means that whatever the county gives, it has to get equal value in return. And so jobs and general economic development don't count for gift clause purposes. The deal has to be a good deal just on the face of the deal. And so the fact that Worldview is paying below market rent, the fact that Worldview isn't paying anything to use the balloon pad, the fact that Worldview is basically accessing the county's credit by taking advantage of this $15 million loan that's building the building, all of those things violate the gift clause before you even start thinking about what benefits the general economy might get from Worldview expanding.
How does it differ from, say, and I don't know if you've studied this as a case study, but the county built a baseball stadium for Major League spring training, and it used bonds to do that, another form of government loans, and Major League Baseball eventually left and taxpayers are still paying that off. How is that not a violation and this example potentially is?
Well, I haven't looked at the terms of that deal, so I can't say for sure whether it doesn't violate the gift clause. What it does demonstrate is how these deals can go bad and taxpayers can be left holding the bag. And so that's why general economic benefits aren't enough. The deal on its face needs to be a fair one for taxpayers.
What would be an alternative way for the county to set up some sort of arrangement in a situation like this where it sees some regional economic development benefit or economic jobs incentive benefit and still sort of help a company get going? What's another way to arrange an agreement?
It's actually really simple in this case because there's a state law that just defines how the county has to lease its property. So what the county has to do is have an appraisal, it has to have a public auction, and then it needs to sell the property for at least 90% of the appraised value. So if it does those three things, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation, but the county completely ignored those requirements in this deal.
So it has to be a sale, not a lease? Is that one of the specifics you're mentioning?
Oh no, it can be a lease. So the requirements are that there's an appraisal, that there's a public auction, and that the lease price is at least 90% of the appraised value. And the county just completely ignored all those requirements here.
When a court looks at this case, how does sort of public opinion weigh in? I mean, obviously there are people who think this would be a good idea. We're also hearing people who agree with Goldwater that it's violating state law. So how does a court look at the case when you bring a lawsuit like this?
Well, what I've heard from the public, and actually on the way into the studio here, I heard from a member of the public who was complaining about the roads here in Pima County. And so I think the sentiment that I've heard is that folks want their roads repaired before they want a balloon company subsidized. But those sorts of considerations don't really play into the court's decision. The court's going to look at what the Constitution requires and what the law requires and make a decision on that basis.
Do you think the case will go to trial?
Probably not a trial. We'll probably have just summary judgment, which is just we'll have discovery, depositions, and then we'll file a legal memorandum explaining our positions.
And then the judge
will decide. Yeah, there won't be a jury.
And now for the other side. I asked County Administrator Chuck Huckleberry to explain why he thinks the lawsuit should be thrown out.
It was filed using a statute that frankly ignores the Arizona economic development statutes in Arizona. All of the incentives that cities and towns and counties can provide in job attraction are based on economic development statutes, not the statutes for leasing that this particular lawsuit was filed under. There are a lot of other reasons. I think one of the other reasons that we feel a little concerned about is the fact that the Goldwater Institute didn't express any concerns when the city of Mesa issued $20 million of bonds for Able Engineering to build their facility for them. They haven't expressed a great deal of concern over the Scottsdale Airport expansion of $20 million of bonds issued by the city of Scottsdale to the Gemini Air Group to build hangars and air facilities for them. And we haven't heard a peep about Glendale and Gilbert, who issued $35 million of bonds to attract St. Mary's College, a private Catholic university out of Chicago. So I think we're a little concerned that we are looking singled out in Arizona. And I think the biggest concern we have is that if the statutes are really wrong, then Arizona might as well not compete in the economic development arena.
And the statute that you're saying the lawsuit was incorrectly filed under would be the gift clause, to use layman terms. Okay.
Yes, and our lawyers looked extensively at the gift clause. They've briefed on the gift clause before. They know a great deal about the gift clause, and they looked at this particular proposal and said it does not violate the gift clause.
So why did you ask your board to approve this contract specifically?
Pretty simple. Our goal since the Great Recession has been to rebuild the tax base. The tax base has shrunk by 25%. The only way we're going to rebuild the tax base is attract new employment within the region. And this was a startup company that got their start here in Tucson, and we didn't really want them to move to Florida or New Mexico. And so we wanted to enjoy the benefit of those 500 jobs that they're going to have at that facility within about 3 years.
And there was the potential that the company would leave the area without this type of incentive?
Oh, absolutely. Basically, they had offer of free facilities in Florida and New Mexico, and had we not structured our agreement and lease with them the way we did, they would be relocating right now to one of those two states. And I think it's very important for people to understand that the county's total expenditure in facilities, headquarters, manufacturing, is really about $15 million plus interest, and so that adds up to about $19 million. Over the course of a 20-year lease, we're going to receive about $24 million back in lease payments. So frankly, we make about a $4 million profit on the transaction, so we can't really fathom how this is being considered a gift.
If it were to be found that this arrangement is not in compliance with the state constitution or state laws, what would be another way to structure a deal that would work?
Well, there really aren't any. And so had we structured this arrangement with a straight lease payback, we would not have won the competition over Florida or over New Mexico, and we would have just simply waved goodbye to 500 good-paying jobs that pay 150% of the median wage in the region.
Now, is the company guaranteed to provide those jobs?
Company has got performance requirements that says that they have to provide those jobs, and if they don't, we can terminate the lease.
Do you understand why, even if this is in compliance with the law, there are people who are upset at an expenditure of county funds for a private company?
Well, I don't think you can say it's for a private company. It's for an economic development activity. And so while the private company needs facilities to operate, they also provide 500 good-paying jobs that people are going to buy houses in this community and spend their money in this community. And if we can't attract new jobs to the community, the tax base is not going to expand. If the tax base doesn't expand, that means the tax burden on the existing residents is even higher.
Are there any other companies asking for any similar type of arrangements, or do you conceive that there would be others? Well,
I gave you the 3 examples that have occurred in the Phoenix metropolitan area just within the last year. Every economic development action, companies look for incentives. They look at where they can be best economically located, and that means a state and a region has to compete economically. If we don't compete, we're not going to win. If we don't win, we're not going to expand the tax base.
Do you think this case will go to trial?
It's going to be tried before a judge, and that's fine if it goes to trial. We think that the lawsuit is serious error and not productive. And in fact, what it does in Arizona is it signals that companies wishing to relocate here are at some risk of being attacked legally if they make similar arrangements with other communities in Arizona. So it's really a fundamental attack on our economic development incentive programs, not only that Pima County has, but every city and town in the state and every county in the state.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Tonight on Arizona Week, a one-on-one interview with Governor Doug Ducey.
Knowing that the federal government can change the rules and pull the rug out from underneath the state. So we are working with the proper departments to have more information as to what's possible.
Now our Journalist Roundtable. Joining me in the studio are my colleague Christopher Conover from Arizona Public Media, Tim Steller of the Arizona Daily Star, and Dan Shearer of the Green Valley News and Sahuarita Sun. Tim, I want to see how you come in here, since you're a columnist and can offer a little more of your opinion than some of our other colleagues at the table. Do you think the weight leans toward one side or the other here in this debate about the lawsuit?
Well, I'm not a lawyer nor a judge,
Right.
and they will be the ones deciding
Solely
this.
a columnist.
Just a columnist, but I'll just use that leeway to say whatever I want. And in this case, what I said was I think there is some doubt that the county isn't getting adequate payback. It's true that the lease rates are not up to what the law that Jim Manley is citing, but I'm not convinced that that's what the court will eventually decide on. I mean, if you look at if they perform their end of the contract, they will be paying us back and then some. And I think that might be the fundamental question that the court wants answered.
And if they don't, if Worldview does not perform its end, does not keep up with those lease payments, what happens?
Well, then the county, we the taxpayers, get the building back, and that there is a question as to whether that's a good enough deal. I mean, we don't know whether we can find a good tenant, or at least one that will pay enough to pay us back for constructing the building in the first place.
But certainly, that's different than some of the bad deals we saw years ago with Rio Nuevo, where if someone didn't perform their end of the contract, they still got to keep the property.
Sure,
so
and even going back before Rio Nuevo, there's a long history of this, not just in Arizona or Tucson, but across the country, where companies get big giveaways and then they don't do their end of the bargain, and then they just get to walk away. It's the gift clause that you mentioned is nice in that it forces us to try to make a good deal for the taxpayers, and I really appreciate that.
Now, as we saw, Huckleberry says other municipalities are not getting sued for very similar deals, or what he characterizes as similar deals. How do you respond to his claim that this is basically unfair?
Well, it is unfair, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. The Goldwater Institute has looked away from a variety of deals right in its backyard. When I asked Jim Manley this when he was visiting our newsroom, he said, well, taxpayers complained to me about this one. They didn't complain to us about the others. All of which kind of plays into the politics of this, I think. This being a Democrat-run county with a lot of angry Republicans who are angry about the way the county is run, it's natural that, or not surprising, I should say, that some of the probably Republican opponents of Huckleberry and the board majority would complain to someplace like the Goldwater Institute.
And I think that's not a good line of thought. I think that their beating up on Chuck Huckleberry just has really no place in this. Really what it amounts to, and Jim Manley said it, is that the deal needs to be fair. And the recent changes to the Arizona gift clause do not mean that economic development agreements are out the door. It just means that there's a higher standard. And really what it comes down to is that the business cannot have a grossly disproportionate benefit over the taxpayers. And so that's the judgment call here, is the business going to be benefiting more than the taxpayers? And I think in this case, and Chuck Huckleberry said it himself, no, they're going to be actually making something off the deal, and the taxpayers are going to be just fine. But if you take all the legal stuff and you just push it aside, I think the bigger question is a business like this that floats gear into the sky, is the risk and it being so speculative really worth taxpayer money, spending taxpayer money on. Is the risk too great? I think that's the key question.
Which is separate from the lawsuit question.
Absolutely.
Right, that's a political question, and my argument has been that that particular question is best dealt with by the voters this fall when we elect 5 supervisors.
Do we know when Worldview begins paying? Are we building it and then they pay back, or do they begin paying right away so they could fold before it's built or as soon as it's built, but they've put some money in initially?
They'll be paying annual lease payments for the 20-year term of the lease. So, I mean, construction starts soon and they'll start paying.
And then as Tim referred to earlier, there are benchmarks there. So at any point, if they're not making them, the county can pull the deal. Doesn't have to, though. That's the real question, will the county pull the deal if they are 20 employees short of where they're supposed to be at a certain point? And there's a trust issue, and we know voters have a big problem with Pima County when it comes to trust.
Absolutely, and that's a problem with a lot of these deals is it's kind of an in for a dime, in for a dollar kind of process. We take this risk and we don't, first of all, the politicians aren't willing to pull the rug out, as Dan says, and secondly, it feels like a waste of money in the first place. Then why did we do this in the first place if we're going to call the contract right away?
Tim, we've talked a lot about sort of fairness, but we haven't touched too much on the economic development angle. And so I'm just wondering for you to read the crystal ball a little bit. If the county loses this lawsuit, does that become an economic development issue for other communities, for the state as a whole?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, it depends on how that happens in part. The last time the gift clause was decided at the Supreme Court, they allowed the deal to stand that was being decided. Turkin versus Gordon was the case. It was a City North development in Phoenix, and the case was about parking spaces that the city got as part of the deal. And so the court said, yeah, this can stand. Retrospectively, leave that alone, but going forward, you have to follow these standards. So if we get as far as that, I think it's pretty likely this deal will stand. But it's possible that if there's an injunction or something like that, then it could throw a lot of things into chaos. I mean, a lot of deals. We're hearing about a lot of deals these days, and they'll have to look at them anew, I think.
But look at the City North deal. It's $100 million for really what amounted to 200 parking spaces. That is, go back to the term, grossly disproportionate.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, in this case, we're talking $20 million and then $24 million, I think, after the lease and everything's paid back and everything. That's not grossly disproportionate, and the taxpayer wins. I think Pima County is on pretty firm footing with this. But let's go back to the reality here, and it's a little tough to say, but 2 of the people involved in Worldview were also involved in one of the most basically a pseudoscience experiment called Biosphere, and a lot of people have trust issues with that too. Now, not that they haven't proven themselves in this arena, in this industry, but a lot of people are looking at it and saying, aren't those the people who were locked up for a couple of years in this crazy experiment that embarrassed a lot of true scientists? I think that's also playing into it.
To their defense, though, of course, they've had a career in business since then here locally.
Correct.
With Tarragon Space Development, I think it was called, a business that succeeded and which they, I think, then sold.
And Paragon's been very good. There's no doubt about it. But again, though, it's coming back to how the public is seeing this. And we know in Pima County, a lot of things were decided at the perception level.
Sure, everywhere.
All right, on that note, Chuck Huckleberry also this week released his budget recommendation. Dan, he says that the county needs to raise property taxes again. Tell us why he says that.
Well, for the same reason that we had to do it last year, and that is the state is foisting more on the counties. In this situation, it's called additional state aid to education. And 35 years ago, they put a 1% cap on the primary property tax, which was good for homeowners, but bad for school districts because now they couldn't get the full levy. And so the state said, well, we'll kick in that money. And so for us this year, I think it's $17 million, if I'm not mistaken, that the state would have been kicking in, but now they're not, and they're saying the counties now have to. So that's what he's saying. And so it's going to mean, $10 to $20 more for your average homeowner.
We should also add that this is another lawsuit. The county is suing the state in this case to try and overturn that pass-through. They're actually suing based on last year's, but as you mentioned, the details remain the same for this coming year. And
Pima County gets hit upside the head a lot because of the tax rates and increasing. But the last 2 years, it's been very understandable why they've had to go that route. Now people are saying, yeah, but if you cut out some of the garbage, we wouldn't have to do that. That's another argument. The fact is the state is forcing counties to pay more.
And the difference between what the budget would have been and what the budget is, the difference in what the county needs to spend is exactly what the county's raising in that tax
Right.
increase, so potentially defensible
Correct.
at the ballot box.
This one is.
Okay. But also I wanted to touch on a story that you had in the Green Valley News this week about Pima County Justice Court seeking a budget increase when each of the departments make their request of the county administration and the supervisors. So why do they want more money?
Well, that's a good question, because in 2010, the Green Valley Justice Court had 18,000 filings, and most of those are civil traffic filings. And in 2015, it was about 3,400. Nobody can explain to us why we have this huge drop. And by the way, the other courts are not seeing that. So we have this huge drop, yet they want $89,000 more. Part of it is because they need extra help, which I don't understand. I don't think that's defensible, but they also want better security, which is defensible and it needs it, and they also need translation services. So they do want some money for some right reasons, but again, you're doing 1/6 of the cases you were doing 6 years ago, and you want more money for extra help. Doesn't make sense.
All right, I'm going to jump from the county budget to the state budget, which just got settled this week. Christopher, give us the basics.
The basics it's higher than it was last year. It's 9.6 billion, 9.58 for those of you really keeping score at home, but 9.6 billion. A lot of the increases in it are one-time dollars, which means the state's writing a check, for example, to higher education for $19 million to try and make up for some past cuts, but they said, don't look for that money again. This is a one-time. So there is more money. There's more money for them to work with, which was part of the hang-up. The state just had more dollars to play with, and people saw that and wanted to get some projects funded. But overall, it is larger. Good budget, bad budget, that as typical of all state and county and municipal budgets, depends on who you ask on that.
And I feel like I should clarify. I said the budget got settled this week, but that doesn't mean the process is actually ended.
The process is not ended. As we speak right now, the legislature is still meeting. They've passed the budget, they've sent it to the governor, but there were things, for example, that did not get in the budget that are still being tried to be added in, like kids care, the children's insurance program. There was a big fight Thursday night. Tim and I were both watching. I could see both of us posting on Twitter throughout the night as a small group of Republicans defied their leadership in the House and got kids care put back into play. They tried to get it in the budget. It didn't make the budget deal. Democrats tried to put it into the into the budget. They had no chance. The small group of Republicans got it put back in play Thursday night. The question is, what does the Senate do with it? What does the governor do with it? But it was, for people who like watching legislative procedures, this was a good one to watch. Lots of intrigue, lots of rule challenges and things like that, and a group of Republicans really going against their leadership.
So what does that say about the overall balance of power in the legislature, where we typically just see straight party line votes?
Every year it seems like something pops up, and this one I think surprised some people. David Gowan, the House Speaker, earlier in the day had lost 3 votes. 3 bills that he was sponsoring went down, 1 in the Senate and 2 in the House. Here we are at the end of the session, his last session. He's running for Congress, and his own members turned on him. He did get 1 of them back. They brought it up after kids care, and he had done enough arm twisting to get the votes he needed. On that particular one, it deals with a development. He needed 2 votes. The board was open for an hour. Voting was open for an hour, and he couldn't get the 2 votes. After he lost, he did some arm twisting, as they say, and a couple hours later was able to get it back.
And I don't know if we've said that Kids Care is the low-income health insurance program for kids. Tim, we've got just about a minute left, and I want to get your assessment about what all of this says about the politics of the state legislature today.
Well, I mean, the key is in the Senate, well, 2 keys. Andy Biggs, the Senate president, does not like the children's health insurance program, of which Kids Care is a part. And so he would, at the House earlier in the session, actually passed a standalone bill by, I think, a 47-12 margin that would have reinstated Kids Care, which is health insurance for the working poor. Biggs never allowed it to be heard. That led to these other efforts. but still, he's standing in the way, and it may well not pass because ideologically speaking, he doesn't believe in this kind of government healthcare, basically.
All right, well, we're going to keep watching next week because presumably some of this may be settled at that point. That's all we have for this week. You can follow the week's news on our website or watch past episodes of this and other AZPM shows online. Thanks for watching.